Hello, this is Alan G. Davison, and I'm going to be bringing you another chapter from The Blessed. Now, let's see here. Open right up. Now, let's start off with chapter 2. I mean, 1. 1. Make a terrible audiobook talker. Whatever you want to call that job. Anyway, chapter 1. The man sighed as he scraped a hardly sharpened knife over his chin. He didn't wince as it scraped a little too hard. He looked at his face, cold, hard, lined with frustration as he eliminated the salt and pepper covering his chin. He looked at his face. The lower part was covered by scraps of metal drafted into bone. Hurt just as bad then as well, he muttered to himself, pushing back a few gray strands. His long, dust-covered hair was a stringy mess. Then he was as well, long and stringy and half dead. He walked through the wooden home he had built, the clang of his right metal leg pounding on the wood, as he came to a chair and sat down in a winced, twined-up wooden chair. He looked out a broken window, a small stick lined in a ground of dirt. "Dad?" came a voice. He frowned as he turned over to see his boy, her boy, Dan Nonku, his mother's boy, all the way down to his heart. He opened the door cheerfully as usual as he sat down and dug into his breakfast. He smiled as he bit into his food and flashed his warm brown eyes up. "Ignorant fool," he muttered, a small smirk lining his face as he pushed the cracked plate into a rusted sink and went outside to work what little farm he could keep alive. "I was thinking of, working in your workshop, if that's okay," asked Dan. The man turned for a moment and frowned. "Fine. Stay out of trouble," grunted the man as he shut the rusted door behind him. Dan's father grunted as he grabbed a brown work vest and took a stained and worn black hat over his head. Straightening out his gray long-sleeved shirt, he stuffed a pair of gloves in his back pocket as he went out to work. He turned back at his house, grabbing worn pink stain. I'm repeating myself. "He's too much like you," he sighed as he put his hat over his head. Dan watched his father leave as he adjusted the holy black shirt and walked outside to the shop in the backyard. Dan looked around. His father was watering the small area he had planted with what few crops he could manage every year. He had one source of water, a small rusted metal pipe connected to the town's reservoir. Each person was given limited water, and the whole town pooled their food together in a rather successful attempt to keep alive. Dan gave a small smirk as he looked over a small workshop where his father kept all the junk he'd collected over the years. He opened the small shed as he looked at all the bits of technology he had found over the years. I really do have a bad habit of repeating myself. He adjusted his black fingerless gloves and got to work. Played with computer gear slowly as he looked over the metal chip. The small workshop consisted of a few knickknacks to play with. He sat down in a wooden chair as he looked over a battery. He tossed it in his hands as he looked over all the small bits of tech. "Having fun?" asked his feminine voice as Dan looked over as he leaned back in the chair. "Alicia, fancy meeting you here," the young man said, smiling as he tossed the battery over into the pile of junk. He pushed his back hair out of his eyes. "So you here to see me?" he asked, spinning the rusted chair around childishly. "Well, I think that would be the point of coming here," Alicia replied, as she put her hands on her hips. "That's to see my half-dead old man. I swear he gets more and more hollow with each passing season," the boy replied. She gave a sad smirk as she let her hands drop. "True, but what does he have to live for?" she asked as she pushed back her long brown hair. "Tomorrow." Dan shrugged as he threw up his tanned hands. "Wouldn't know. He's been like that as far back as I can remember." "So, 3 seconds ago?" she joked as she flashed her hazel eyes at him. She looked back as her complexion seemed to shine in the blistering heat. She straightened out her brown vest over her white shirt. Dan turned his head a moment as he looked at his brown pants and shoes in a desperate attempt to avert his eyes. "Like what you see?" she asked as she swayed her hips a bit. "No," said Dane as he got up and dusted his black shirt and turned away. She rolled her eyes as she looked at the battery he was playing with. She picked it up and tapped the positive side. "Ouch!" she yelped as she dropped the battery where it rolled off her chest and to settle on the floor. "Stay out of that stuff," commented Dane as he turned to see her stumbling over the battery. She tossed the battery back up, put onto the desk of the old shack. She put her hands behind her back and mustered up an innocent smile. "Sorry," she replied as she walked out. "Must you get into everything?" "Yes," she answered. He shook his head as he escorted her out, then closed the door behind them. "What am I going to do with you?" he asked, giving her an amused glance. "Let me know when you figure that one out." Lots of belligerent sexual tension between these two, I swear. Anyway, the father was working in the field when he watched the two walk out together. "Just like we used to be. So blind, that boy." "My boy, you really are ignorant. This hell on earth, and yet you find a reason to be happy." The older man scratched at his chin, stripping the rust off of the metal bits of his face. "There's a moral in that," muttered the man, as he watched his son trip and fall into the hard ground. "Then again, maybe not." The father shook his head as he dug a shovel into the ground. He watched the pair walk down the dirt road into town. "Excuse me, sir," said a feminine voice. The man whipped around and swung a shovel. The figure was there one moment, then gone the next. "Relax. If I wanted you dead, you would be." "Now, where is your son?" asked the figure, the brown cloak concealing any features. The figure held both hands in a motion of surrender. "You ain't getting anything out of me," muttered the man, as he swung again, with the figure vanishing. "Damn it, I'm blessed." "Just what I needed to deal with," the man muttered. "I will find him," whispered the brown-cloaked figure as she disappeared into the wind. Slam! The figure dropped up as the shovel came down on her head. The father picked the figure up. A picture dropped to the ground. Slowly bending down as the metallic limb creaked, he picked it up. It was an old worn photo of the son and his only friend. He took up the same photo, taken days ago. He looked at her with a quick adjustment, walked back to the house. He dropped the figure on his bed and inspected the photo. He set it down on the nightstand, and he went to the kitchen, walked to the corner, and quickly pulled out a safe. The metal was pristine and had a shine to it. He quickly turned the knob, opening it up. Wiping his hands, he took out a small file containing the picture he had paid for, as well as for Alicia and his son. He re-entered the room, tossing the picture next to the other. Perfect match. Alicia and Diane walked together along the dirt road in silence. As they walked closer to town, passing more and more people with all manner of clothing and metallic parts, they saw that most people used metal to cover up wounds that wouldn't heal. In a cataclysmic event sent by Kami about 100 years ago, the western half of the world was wiped out, and since then those closer to the point of origin would lose skin, and bones would go soft, and one would feel extremely weak, followed by death. Most people had taken to using technology that Kami had given them to the world to replace limbs and cover up wounds that wouldn't heal. Oh boy. Dirty looks became apparent. Both friends were unharmed by the environment. Some believed that those who believed in Kami and his ways were blessed and unharmed by whatever was causing the losses. The people were called blessed. Most that were blessed were allowed into Eden, the home of Kami himself and the biggest city in the world. Eden was called a paradise, rumored that the world was served to perfection and misery was in motion, not a state of feeling. As such, the opposite was true. The uglier you were, the farther you were pushed away from the great city, and thus being forced to live closer to what people called the origin point. As such, made it worse, Dan heard his father and mother had seen Eden, but they were kicked farther and farther away. Each time they were forced to move, the two got worse and pushed farther away. He had heard that he was the reason for his mother's death, her coming so close to the origin point in such a weak point, and then childbirth. He and his father never spoke on the matter, but he had felt that his father blamed him for it. Man alive, talk about Mr. Exposition. The town itself was no name and no origin. It seemed exactly and always has been. No name, since people were more concerned with living or drowning their sorrows. Made of wood and rusted metal, it was one street town with no hope. Everything was either moving or covered with dust. The echo of metal and wood came to life as they started to walk among the porches of the town buildings. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, snapping him out of his thinking. He turned to his friend and gave her a smile. "Just fine," he lied, as he passed by the small inn and the bank. The two walked up to the wooden planks and walked past the small town folks. The group got close to the bar at the other side of the small, almost finishing their of the town, almost finishing their first lap. Dan looked ahead to see a small group of his peers. He lowered his head and tried to walk past unhindered. He braced himself when he felt two hands push up against his shoulder. He was pushed against a weak rail, and then he collapsed into the main road, head over heels. Landing on his back, he looked up to see 5 individuals. "Well, it's the weak little pretty boy," taunted one of them, as he flexed a long-urged mechanical arm and pried a replaced limb that was clumsy but strong. "Playing in the dirt again, you little boy," commented a second, wincing from the static from his mechanical arm. The three older men Why did I say men for? The 3 others howled with laughter as their attention turned elsewhere. "Come on, there's a pretty girl like you hanging with a weakling like that," they howled up as he made it come on. Dane's flashed with electricity as he glared at one of the 3 idiots. "Sorry, I don't date immature fools," she growled as she flashed a quick glare at one. Dane got back up to his feet. The man with the new arm used his finger to push him back into the dirt as the machine hummed. "Whatever, but if you feel like hanging out with real men for a change, you know where to find us." The 3 men laughed as they walked off. She held out her hand as Dane took it to get back up as a jolt of electricity shocked her. Dane fell backwards and stumbled back to his feet. He gave her a questioning look as she sucked on one of her fingers. "You always gave bad jolts when you were mad. With you around, it wouldn't be hard to find any lost socks," joked Alicia. He gave her a mocking smile. "Damn, that one really hurt too, you know," she said, shaking her hand to numb the pain. "Sorry," Dane apologized. Alicia smirked as she waved it off. The pair walked on as more people brushed into them. Dane felt the scraps add up as metal limbs scratched up against him. His arms were scratched all down. I do repeat myself a lot. As his legs were almost always bruised, the metallic parts always gave an increase of strength. Some people got the attachment simply for that reason. Those with a pretty face, especially the boys, were usually the ones teased. Dane wasn't the only target around here, for a few other were blessed, but Dane was sure the reason he got more attention was because of Alicia. Women left unmarked were usually subjected to being hit on by every single guy in town, and hated by every woman. And most usually left for cities closer to Eden. "Now that I think about it, why do you stay here, putting up with the constant idiots?" "What do you mean?" Alicia asked as the 2 walked on a bit further, passing a barber shop. "That's just something I ignore on a regular basis. Besides, they're just ticked I hang out with you no matter how manly they get. Besides, every town has its jerks." "That's not what I meant. I know what holds me here. It's family. But you don't have any, as far as I can remember. Well, I don't know where you live, to come to think of it," Dan mused as Alicia started to slow down. "I really am I'm a really bad friend if I don't even know where you live," he growled to himself as he shook his head. Alicia seemed to relax a bit. "That's because you never asked. Because you always found me before I started looking. You always seemed to know when I was right about to do. And that would be a woman thing. Maybe either that or I'm gullible enough to believe any excuse you can come up with," the young adult said, laughing. She chuckled half-heartedly as the 2 walked on. Up one side and down the other, one talking, the other one listening. The 2 joked as they walked up and ran into the only law enforcer in the area. "Morning, Sheriff Tom," greeted Dane. "Staying out of trouble, I hope," sighed the old man. "Yes, sir," Dane answered, giving a mock salute. "I have heard a band of bandits been causing some trouble in the area. So keep to the town and your home, okay?" the sheriff advised, lighting a pipe. Still giving you trouble? Asked Tom, as he looked over to see a small group laughing and pushing each other around. Nothing worth throwing them in the slammer over, Dayan answered. Wish I could do more than make it worse for you, said the man as he tossed away a dead match. About those bandits, you sure it's not just rumors? Sounds odd they usually keep to the nomads, pondered Dan. Smart. It's been subtle, but they have been getting bolder. It's got a few lawmen out there worried, with the Druids hiding in Europe and the MRF and Angels keeping to their respective cities. Well, never mind. There's no sense in your kids worrying over rumors. Get out of here, and go enjoy yourselves. The two walked back down the one street down. You know, that seems odd, the young man asked his friend. There's always rumors about that sort of thing. What I have heard. She looked around for a moment, continuing. Angels. They say they've been a group in the area, Alicia said with a grin on her face. Now that's a rumor if I ever heard one, day, and chuckled as he started to walk away. It's the truth. It's true. Hey, look, a guest, Alicia said, pointing out. A man with a long black trench coat walked past the two, wearing a pair of really dark camo pants and leather boots. The man had a scraggly brown beard and a short beard, and it covered up most of his face. He had piercing green eyes. A stranger like him got more eyes than the two ever did. He walked past, down, then crossed over to the other side of the road. What stood out the most about his was his sheathed katana and holstered gun. While the gun was a normal .45 caliber, its opposite katana was a work of art, even sheathed. The hilt was gray and styled similar to a broadsword. The grip was grooved into cylinders, as well as for a better grip. The sheath started where the hilt ended, and the metal started the base, but soon met a dark glittering blue. It held up to the metal formed around the very end with two U-like shapes, bottom to bottom. The blue glittering between the metal. Hello, Alicia shouted as she waved at the man. The man turned to see her, giving a small wave back, quickly going back to his own thoughts. The pale and unmarked man met with the sheriff, an unusual combination in the area filled with burning sun. The two glanced around before turning to go inside. The man waved his hand. Let's go. No sense in staring at him. Want to hang out in the mountains? Offered Dan. Alicia nodded and smiled as the two walked on. Mountains were a structural anomaly. 100 years ago, the land in the area was greatly twisted, and a small range was perhaps the only thing of beauty in the area. Dan leaped up to the rocks, walking along, leaping from one to the next, the sun still high in the sky above. The stranger was very pale. Wonder why he's so white, said Dan, kind of like Dad. You know, you're white too, you know, Alicia reminded. Really? He looked down at his hand and blinked. Well, what do you know? So that means there are 3 white people I know now. Congratulations, Alicia said, clapping with a bemused grin on her face. Thank you, Dan bowed. The two sat down on the cliff. The sun was just setting as the earth glowed under the sun. Alicia rubbed her forehead as the two looked down at the town below. The rocks gave off a soft green glow as they became warm. The two sat down there, feet dangling off the cliff. A grave was not too far away from the two. Wonder who he was, said Alicia. She looked over to the cross stabbed in the hard rock. She was my mom, Danny replied. She died the day I was born. And this is where my father buried her. I think because of the amazing view. Really? She said, giving him a soft smile. Yeah. The two stood up as the boy smiled at her. She leaned a little closer and hugged him. The two separated when Tan's attention disappeared. What's that? He asked as a reflection caught his eye. Looks like armor. Very shiny armor. Angels! Alicia shouted. No way, that's impossible. What in the world would angels be doing this so far away from Eden? Come on, they're heading to town. Maybe we may never see Kami's angels again. Let's move, she said, smiling as big grin on her face. She had a big grin on her face. Dan took a deep breath, the town not being his favorite place to hang. Fine, let's go, Dan huffed. The two dashed down the mountain, Dan half sliding as the pair ran down. The two got to town as a large parade of people appeared in full military uniform. "Oh boy, what do the men in the military want now?" asked a random townsman. The Angels were one half of Kami's army, the other being the MRF. The Angels usually operated as peacekeepers in Eden, leaving the MRF with the majority of military operations. Shining in the sunlight, the armored figures marched on. The figures were so out of place that most were a bit concerned. The uniform was made out of an unknown material that kept out whatever was eating away the flesh. Each geared with long-range firearms and close-range blades, the steel itself seemed far more amazing. Plates protected each part with no areas to clip on or off, seamless as skin. The joints were protected by a scale metal that even when bent didn't wrinkle. Black visors started at the chin, creating a dome shape around the head and ending where the hairline would normally start. The man leading was huge, or outfitted with mechanical limbs, far too big. The only explanation for his inhuman size. His weapon was a warhammer that ran the length of the great man. The hammer was head bigger than most men's heads. One end flat, the other an axe-like point. The second to his right appeared male as well. He seemed to slow a bit, as if relying on some unseen force to keep him moving. Outside of all the other pieces, he had no weapon. And then to his left was a female, only noticed with a distinct curving of the armor, gripped all too closely. Her weapon was the most unusual, a thin blade that was far too thin to be a sword in anything but appearance. Nothing could be seen through the visors of the first or any man. The group kept walking, as in the crowd watched in mild curiosity as the group marched, shining in the sun. Dayan watched as the group turned and set up camp not a mile outside the town. Dayan pushed past the group, watching them make a large camp surrounded by rock. The area once called the Desert's Mouth. Dayan watched the group quickly set up a small home and generator. The boy watched on as the interested men and women became less and less, till the sun had long since gone. A small circle appeared around the encampment as the people became scarce, and the area became a small area of small white homes shining in the moonlight. Lights lit the place up as the group soon vanished into their homes. Soon, little was seen as small containers were passed out, and the area was barren with the exception of the new additions. Alicia had to shake her head as the two were now the only ones there. A small group formed up the center, most notable from the marsh, and walked down the road. The pair leaped after them, staying behind the rocks. Dayan hesitated as one with an average height seemed to take an interest in them. The man looked at him for a moment before returning forward, clearly uninterested in the darkened figures in the moonlight. "So the rumors are true. The suckers have radar built in. I always dreamed of being in the military," Dayan smirked. "I wonder if they can hear us as well," the young man pondered. "I'd prefer to get going, Ask them tomorrow. Me? I'd rather leave them to rumors," Alicia answered. "All right, meet me at town tomorrow, then," smirked Dayan and dashed off. The girl watched the four closely before vanishing into the early moon. The boy closed in on his one-story home. His thoughts drifted back to the military. The armor itself seemed reason to join. He slipped in under the creak of the house and snoring of his father. He looked to his bed, slightly disappointed that was all he truly had. He slipped into the dirty blankets and looked up at the ceiling. An image popped into his head as he saw himself in that armor, that visor down and a confident grin on his face. That would be awesome, he smiled as he closed his eyes. Oh, brother, I cannot believe I wrote this. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Man alive. Good ideas, just like everything I write, but seriously, I could have done a lot better than that. Boring, drawn out, repeating myself, and so much exposition you can choke a horse with it. Well, that's all for Chapter 1. Hopefully I'll get Chapter 2 going pretty soon, and maybe my writing will actually start picking up. Man, I really should have done a lot better job with